Hi, I'm the man my wife called useless trash in front of her entire family, her coworkers, and the man she's been sleeping with. Right before she dumped a bucket of dirty water over me, she thought I was nobody. They all did, but not one of them knew. The company they were standing in, the one they used to mock me, I own it. And when I walked onto that stage, every single smile died. Now ask yourself, what happens when the man you humiliated owns your future? At the company's elegant gala, my wife called me useless trash and dumped a bucket of dirty water over me in front of her coworkers, her entire family, and her laughing lover. All without knowing I was the secret owner of the company. They mocked me, but when the MC announced the CEO has arrived and I stepped onto the stage, every smile died. What I did next destroyed her whole family. I eased the car into the driveway of the downtown hotel, the one Rourke Industries used every year for the gala. The sun had dipped behind the Houston skyline, leaving streaks of gold along the glass towers. I sat behind the wheel for a second, listening to Marla talk about the guest list with her mother and father. They spoke over me as if my seat were empty. Her father complained about the valet line. Her mother rattled on about who was wearing what, and Marla chimed in with little corrections meant to show she was the polished one in the group. I nodded when she glanced at me, even though she didn't wait long enough to hear a reply. There was nothing new about it. I had been the extra body in the room since the day her family met me. We stepped inside the hotel. The air smelled faintly of citrus and polished floors. Marla led the way through the lobby like she owned the place, her heels clicking sharply. Her parents followed close, leaving me a step behind. We reached the restaurant connected to the main ballroom, where her relatives had already gathered around two long tables pushed together. They filled the seats quickly, sliding chairs inward, talking loudly, barely pausing as I approached. A server stepped in front of me with a polite smile. "Are you with this group, sir?" Before I could answer, Marla made a small sweeping motion with her hand. "Just put him anywhere." The room continued buzzing, forks scraping plates, glasses clinking. Her words barely rose above the noise, yet they hit with a clarity that never dulled. Just put him anywhere. It wasn't the first time she'd used that tone, but hearing it here, surrounded by her family, tightened something in my chest. I took the last open seat at the end of the table. No one looked up. I listened quietly as they talked about promotions, vacation plans, holiday gatherings. Someone asked Marla if she was still managing things at home on her own. She laughed and said, "Pretty much." I placed my napkin across my lap and kept my eyes on the water glass. If anyone asked me a direct question, I'd answer. No one did. After dinner, we walked toward the ballroom. Marla's cousins drifted behind us, whispering in a way they knew I could hear. Why did she marry him? She had options. She still does. I kept my expression neutral. The board had approved my plan to reveal my ownership in the next quarter, once the restructuring settled. Until then, secrecy mattered. And tonight wasn't the night to break protocol. Still, swallowing their words felt heavier than usual. We reached the ballroom entrance. 2 staff members handled check-ins. The glow from the chandelier above lit the floral arrangements along the walls. Laughter echoed from inside. Everyone looked their best. I stood with Marla's department as they received their table assignments. One by one, the staff handed out place cards. I waited for mine. The stack grew thin. Then it ran out. A staff member looked up. Name? Silas. He flipped through the remaining cards, frowning. I don't have one for you. Marla lifted a shoulder. Just put him at the back. He doesn't need to be here. Her coworkers chuckled the way people do when they're trying to hide their discomfort but enjoy the gossip anyway. A few glanced at my shoes, then away, as if embarrassed for me or amused by the mistake. I didn't ask which. The staff member guided me to a corner table near the exit. The kind of table used for late arrivals or overflow. A place with no view of the stage. A place where people sat only if they didn't matter. I thanked him, though my throat tightened around the word. From where I sat, I could see Marla rejoining her group. She slid into her seat, already laughing at something her coworker said. Her mother turned to look at me briefly before leaning in to whisper something that made Marla smirk. A small place card lay in front of each of them, neat black lettering, their names arranged with intention. Mine did not exist. The absence stung more than I expected. A simple card, yet it symbolized everything I had become in that circle. Unnamed, unacknowledged, unnecessary. I leaned back in the chair, letting the sound of the room wash over me. For a brief moment, I remembered when Marla and I first married. I believed my quiet nature balanced her drive. She once said she admired that I didn't need a spotlight to feel whole. But over time, she mistook silence for weakness, patience for passivity, and kindness for surrender. A staff member approached my table with a pitcher of water. He paused, studying me for a second. His voice softened. "Sir, you don't seem like you belong back here." He didn't mean harm. If anything, it was a gesture of respect. Yet the words cut deeper than Marla's dismissiveness. They confirmed something I had tried to ignore for too long. No, I didn't belong back here. And as I looked toward Marla laughing at her family's table, a thought crossed my mind that I had never allowed myself to consider before. She didn't even glance in my direction. Her head tilted back in laughter, fingers grazing the rim of her wine glass like she didn't have a care in the world. And that was the moment it hit me. Whatever thread had held us together all these years, it had worn down to a single fraying strand. I stayed seated, letting the noise of the ballroom blur into background static. My chair creaked slightly when I shifted, but no one noticed. They never did. The gala continued around me like I was a ghost at my own funeral. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the man who used to believe this marriage was salvageable. Marla walked over a few minutes later, her glass half full, her smile drained. She stopped just behind me, bending slightly to speak without drawing attention. "What are you doing sitting here?" Her voice was tight, sharp. "You're embarrassing me." I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes. "You asked them to seat me here." She exhaled, one of those dismissive breaths people use when they're not ready to own the truth. "You always twist things. You know that?" That tone again, clinical, cold, like I was a patient she couldn't diagnose. Her eyes darted back to her table as if she was afraid they'd think less of her for talking to me too long. I studied her face, the practiced tension in her jaw, the flicker of performance behind her expressions. She wasn't here with a husband, she was playing a role for an audience. "I'm not the one performing," I said quietly. She didn't respond, just downed the rest of her drink and walked away without looking back. For a few seconds, I watched her reflection in the glass wall across from me. Her spine was rigid, smile reloaded, mask back in place. And I realized something that sat heavier than her insult. She hadn't been mine for a long time. She belonged to their approval now. Her family, her coworkers, the people clapping at every punchline she delivered. Two men from her department passed behind me, laughing about something. They paused a few steps ahead. Then one of them whispered just loud enough to pierce the hum of the room. "Why does she bring him? He adds nothing." The other replied with a chuckle, "She said he's harmless, useless, but harmless." That landed harder than I expected. It wasn't the words. It was the ease with which they said them, like it was common knowledge, like it was something she had said before, maybe more than once, maybe in front of them, maybe about me. I sat very still, feeling every inch of my suit, every sound in the room amplified as if I'd been dropped underwater. My ears rang, not from anger, but clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of thoughtless cruelty. It was a story she had built, one she fed to the people in her life, brick by brick, until no one questioned it. I was the fool, the ghost, the burden, and worse, I had helped her build it by never speaking up. I closed my eyes, and in the dark behind my eyelids, I saw years' worth of birthdays where she cut me off mid-sentence, holidays where her family asked about her career but not mine, moments when I tried to share an idea, only to be told, "You wouldn't understand. It's a business thing." That sting, the sting of being underestimated by someone who slept beside me every night, hadn't just worn me down. It had changed me. A server walked past holding a tray of place cards, likely replacements or additions. One of Marla's cousins grabbed one as a joke and grinned, holding it up like it was a game. "Let's save him the one by the emergency exit," he laughed. "Easier for him to sneak out unnoticed." The table roared. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The gall of it, the way they turned my existence into a joke while sipping white wine and complimenting each other's outfits, lit something low and slow inside me. It didn't explode. It boiled. I stood, adjusting my jacket, and stepped away from the table. The ballroom was too loud, too bright. I found a hallway near the side exit, quiet, dimly lit. Just a few muted lamps and a faded carpet. I leaned against the wall, exhaling through my nose like I'd been holding my breath for hours. It wasn't anger that held me up. It was realization. For years, I'd convinced myself that staying quiet kept the peace, that by not fighting back, I was protecting something, but all I had protected was their version of me, the silent accessory, the background character. And now I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wasn't just being humiliated. I was being erased. I clenched my fists, not in rage, but in decision. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next. But I knew this. I was done being small in my own life. And just as I stood alone in the hallway, gathering myself, I heard my wife say something behind me that froze me in place. I froze where I stood. Not because her voice was loud, but because it carried a casual cruelty I hadn't heard spoken plainly before. Marla was just around the corner in the hallway, talking to her cousin. I stepped slightly back, staying out of sight, letting their conversation reach me before I decided whether to return to the ballroom or walk out into the night. "He's only here because I didn't want to come alone," she said, her tone flat, almost bored. Her cousin laughed softly. "Then drop him somewhere on the way home. He won't mind." I didn't hear her reply, only the clink of her bracelet as she turned back toward the ballroom. I waited until their footsteps faded before pushing off the wall and making my way toward the noise again. The hallway felt colder now. Not from the air conditioning, but from the realization that everything I'd tried to excuse for years was no longer something I could pretend away. This wasn't a rough patch. It was the truth. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the lights felt harsher, reflecting off glasses and polished shoes. The room was alive with chatter, happy voices, toasts, greetings, but none of it touched me. I looked at the tables, noticing things I used to overlook on purpose, the way Marla angled her body toward her coworkers while keeping her back to me, how her relatives gestured animatedly, planning trips I wasn't part of, talking about future events I would never be invited to. Even when I stood close enough to hear them, they acted as though my presence was just an empty chair. I returned to the far corner briefly, not to sit, but to gather myself. The gala staff moved between tables, carrying trays, replacing drinks, adjusting decorations. Everything seemed coordinated except my place in this room. I watched Marla smile, flipping her hair when someone told a joke. It was a smile I used to think belonged to me at least a little. Now I saw it clearly. It was a mask, polished for her audience, the people she valued more than her own husband. A memory surfaced without warning. It came with the faint scent of lilies, the ones placed at my mother's funeral years ago. I remembered standing in our living room later that evening, after everyone had gone home. I had tried to talk to Marla about how much it hurt to lose the one person who always understood me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, ashamed of the grief that made it hard to breathe. She looked at me and said, "Emotions don't solve anything. Keep it together. No one wants to see a grown man cry." I thought she was trying to help. I told myself she was encouraging strength. But tonight, that memory cracked open, revealing its real meaning. To her, my pain was inconvenient. My feelings were something she wanted hidden, not held. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a prop. That realization hit deeper than anything said tonight. I rubbed my palms together, grounding myself. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't outwardly angry. I felt something colder, like the slow closing of a door inside me. A hand touched my shoulder gently. I turned to see a woman from Marla's department, a kind face I'd seen in meetings but seldom spoken to. "Hey," she said quietly. "You're doing great, Silas. Just stay low tonight, okay? Stay low." A man speaks to a dog that way, to a child, not to an equal. She meant well, and that made it even worse. It meant this was normal. It meant everyone already knew the script. Marla shined. I stayed small. I nodded politely, though her words left a heaviness in my gut. She walked away, returning to the laughter at the main table. I followed her movement with my eyes, and that's when I saw it. Marla's cousin raising his glass to offer her his seat. She accepted it immediately, sliding into the spot beside him without a glance in my direction. Someone said loud enough for me to hear, "Your husband can sit with the staff. It suits him." Marla lifted her glass, smiling as if the comment was harmless. No shake of the head, no gentle correction, no defense, nothing. The room didn't spin. It sharpened. Every sound was clearer, every face more defined. And I stood there, absorbing all of it, letting the pain settle where it needed to settle so it wouldn't cloud my judgment later. I wasn't just dealing with one person's disrespect. I was watching an entire group dismiss my existence, not because they knew me, but because Marla had painted the picture for them, and they trusted it. I walked toward the back of the ballroom, near the dimmer lights, needing a place to think. My steps were steady, my breathing even, but something inside me shifted, quiet and irreversible. A part of me stopped hoping she would ever see me, stopped hoping this marriage could be repaired, stopped believing silence was the safer choice. I stood at the far edge of the room, feeling the cool air from the hallway brush against my neck. The noise behind me faded slightly as I focused on the truth settling in my chest. A door had closed, and whatever was growing in its place was colder, clearer, and far less forgiving. As I steadied myself, letting the transformation take shape inside me, I caught sight of movement near the main table. Marla stepped away from her seat, smoothing her dress, then leaned in close to a man I had never seen before. I didn't move right away. I watched her hand linger on his arm, just long enough for anyone paying attention to wonder how many times she'd done it before. The touch wasn't overt, but it was practiced. Familiar. The kind of touch that spoke of comfort and quiet intimacy. She tilted her head, laughing at something he said. I couldn't hear it over the music, but the sound of her laugh reached me anyway. It was a version of her I hadn't seen in a long time, lighter, gentler, and never for me. She used to tilt her head like that when I surprised her with flowers, or when I stumbled over my words trying to ask her out for the first time. That version of her had vanished quietly over the years, and I had told myself that marriage naturally faded, that people grew used to each other. But watching her now, with him, I realized it hadn't faded. She had just taken all the softness she once gave me and handed it to someone else. I drifted closer, not with the intent to interrupt, but just to hear. I stayed near one of the columns by the dance floor, half shielded by a potted plant. She called him by name. Damon. He smiled, glanced toward the room. He followed you here tonight? Marla didn't miss a beat. He always does. That sentence landed like a stone to the chest. Damon didn't ask if I came. He assumed I would. And Marla. Marla said it with pride, like I was some loyal pet trailing after her. Not her husband. Not her equal. I turned slightly to avoid being seen. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, and I grabbed a glass without thinking, mostly to keep my hands occupied. My eyes stayed fixed on the two of them, on the way she leaned toward him like gravity worked differently when he was near. I took a sip, and it tasted like nothing, like everything else tonight. In my head, memories began stitching themselves together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Nights she came home hours after her meetings, clothes that smelled different, perfume she never wore around me, excuses that I accepted not because they made sense, but because confronting them would mean facing the truth I wasn't ready for. Until now. I turned toward the ballroom's side door, needing air, maybe even just a moment alone. But her voice followed, like a tether I hadn't cut yet. She was laughing again, softly, close, a sound meant for someone she wanted something from. I paused near the doorway, torn between stepping out into the quiet of the hallway or staying and seeing the story unfold the way it was meant to. A part of me was screaming to leave, to reclaim some dignity, but deeper still, something colder whispered, "No, don't let them write this without you." Just then, two women walked past me, barely noticing I stood a few feet away. Marla's aunts, dressed in glittering evening gowns, their hair too perfect to be natural. "He's so dull," one said, glancing in my direction. "Marla deserves someone exciting," the other replied, lowering her voice as if whispering made it more respectable. "She already found someone," the first woman said with a smirk. "You saw how she looks at Damon." They didn't lower their voices enough. Or maybe they didn't care if I heard. Maybe that was the point. They saw me. They just didn't consider me worth including. The shame that flared in my stomach quickly gave way to something sharper, a clarity, a quiet but firm voice in my head saying, "Enough." I walked into the hallway again and leaned against the cool metal railing near the emergency exit. The buzz of the crowd was muffled here, and for a moment I let the silence wrap around me. I had told myself for years that marriage took patience, that biting my tongue was strength, that letting things slide made for peace. But it wasn't peace. It was permission, and I had given too much of it away. I stood there a long time, the coolness of the metal under my palm, my eyes fixed on the floor, but my mind spinning faster than it had in months, maybe years. Eventually, I straightened and walked slowly back toward the entrance of the ballroom. I stopped just short of the main doorway. From where I stood, I could see her again, Marla, glowing in candlelight, laughing softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. Damon beside her, his hand casually placed at the small of her back. She didn't move away. She didn't stiffen. She didn't glance around to see who was watching. She just smiled. And in that smile, I saw the confirmation I'd been dodging for too long. There was no love left, no hesitation, no fear of consequence. She wasn't afraid of being caught, because she didn't think I mattered enough for it to cost her anything. That was the moment something final broke inside me, not loudly, not with fire, but with ice. The man I had been, the one who waited, who excused, who hoped, he didn't survive that smile. And as Damon's hand lingered on her back, Marla lifted her glass and said something that made every person at the table look directly at me. The moment her words sent every head turning toward me, I felt the shift in the room like a physical ripple. Conversations dipped. Glasses paused midair. Even Damon leaned back slightly, watching my reaction as if he already knew how the next few seconds would play out. I stayed where I was near the doorway, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But my chest tightened all the same. The music pulsed through the speakers, yet it felt distant, like it belonged to another place entirely. Marla lowered her glass slowly, her eyes sliding toward me with a mixture of annoyance and performance. She knew she had an audience. She fed off it. "He's useless," she said, louder this time, "and everyone knows it." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. That almost made it worse. It was the kind of quiet chuckling people do when they want to show agreement without looking cruel. But cruelty doesn't need volume. It just needs confidence. And she had plenty of that. I felt warmth rise along my neck, that familiar burn of humiliation that I'd pushed down too many times in the past. Still, I didn't say anything. I didn't trust the words that might come out if I opened my mouth. I walked back toward the table area slowly, not to join them, but to stand closer. Close enough that I wasn't hiding, far enough that I wasn't part of their circle. The clatter of silverware signaled dinner service starting, waiters weaving between tables with trays. None of it reached me. Inside, something was shifting. Years of small wounds, dismissive glances, jokes at my expense, whispered comments, aligned in my mind like pages of a book falling open to the truth. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't an awkward moment. It was a pattern I had let grow, a pattern she nurtured. I focused on my breath, on keeping it steady, not for her, for me. Marla took a seat again and tapped her fork against her glass in a mock toast. "You all know how he is," she announced, her tone light and patronizing, always standing around looking lost. "Sometimes I swear I married a shadow." Someone at the table snorted. Another covered her mouth, pretending to hide her amusement. Damon grinned, leaning back like he was watching a show he'd seen before. The tightness in my stomach intensified, but I kept my posture relaxed. I refused to give them the image they wanted, a man collapsing under their cheap superiority. I hadn't realized how low they thought of me until I saw how freely they expressed it. And then came the line that hit harder than everything else so far. Marla's aunt, already flushed from wine, leaned toward another relative and said, "Remember when he cried at his mother's funeral? Pathetic. Marla told us he was too emotional for his own good." For a moment, my breath stalled. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The words cut because they touched the part of my life I cherished more than anything. My mother had been my anchor, the only person who saw me completely without judgment. She was gone. And now they mocked the grief that broke me. It was disrespect on a level I hadn't even considered possible. I stood very still, hands lowering to my sides, fingers curling inward. That memory had been sacred to me. I'd kept it close, personal. Hearing it thrown around like some cheap joke snapped something deep inside. I stepped away from the crowd, letting the sound of their laughter fade behind me. As I walked, someone called out from the table, "Where's he going now? To think?" More laughter. I didn't turn back. Each step down the carpeted aisle felt like shedding something. Every excuse, every justification, every hope that Marla would eventually see what she had in front of her. Near the drink station, a staff member paused while refilling water glasses. She looked at me briefly, her expression softening. "I'm sorry," she said in a low voice. "People shouldn't treat you like that." The simplicity of her words cut deeper than all the insults combined. For the first time tonight, someone acknowledged the cruelty, not as humor or gossip, but as wrong. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice steady despite everything. She nodded and returned to her work, leaving me with a rare sliver of humanity in a room full of masks. I made my way back to the hallway. The air was cooler here, or maybe it just felt that way after standing in the heat of other people's judgment. I rested my hand on the railing again, grounding myself. This moment felt like hitting bottom. The kind of bottom people talk about when they say they finally saw the truth. I had loved Marla. I had supported her dreams, believed in her ambition, covered her flaws, carried her through financial storms she didn't even know existed. But tonight, she stripped away the last piece of dignity I had been holding on to. Not privately, not accidentally, publicly, intentionally. And beneath that crushing humiliation, beneath the ache of losing whatever good remained in our marriage, something new began to surface. A slow, rising strength, a refusal to be erased any longer. As I steadied myself in the hallway, the first spark of self-defense forming inside me, I heard a commotion from the ballroom. Marla shouting my name like I had done something wrong. I turned my head toward the ballroom. Marla's voice sliced through the music and conversation like a blade. "Silas!" she shouted again. Her tone was sharp, accusatory, theatrical, drawing all eyes toward the hallway. For a brief second, I thought she might stop, that this was another one of her public digs. But then I saw her, standing by the stage, one hand on her hip, the other gripping the handle of a large gray janitor's bucket. I froze. The bucket looked out of place in a ballroom dressed in gold and crystal. It was half filled with something dark, murky water that sloshed every time she shifted her weight. The lights dimmed as the awards portion of the evening approached, but that bucket stood out like a red warning flare in my mind. I took one step forward. The room was buzzing with alcohol and gossip, but her voice carried through like she had trained it to hit only where it hurt. "There you are. she said, smiling wide. But it wasn't joy. It was venom, sugar-coated for the crowd. Didn't think you'd show your face again. Every table turned. Faces I knew. Faces I didn't. Phones rose into the air, angled toward the spectacle unfolding. I saw Damon standing nearby, relaxed, smirking. I walked in slowly, unsure whether this was real or some fevered nightmare. I wanted to believe she wouldn't. Not in front of all these people, not in front of her family. But then she spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, loud and clear, "I just want to say how proud I am of my husband." She looked directly at me. "He's always lurking in the background, always showing up where he doesn't belong, pretending he matters." Laughter spread like fire on dry grass. Damon let out a low whistle, and then she lifted the bucket. There was a gasp, sharp, collective, like the whole room inhaled at once. My body tensed, instincts on high alert, but I didn't move. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't believe she'd actually do it. Maybe some part of me still thought she was better than this. She wasn't. The water hit me before I could take a step back, cold, dirty, sharp with the sting of bleach and old chemicals. It slammed against my chest, soaking through my shirt, my jacket, my slacks. The stink clung to my skin like a second insult. The room erupted. Glasses clinked in surprise. A woman yelped. Someone laughed so hard they knocked over their drink. I stood there, soaked and still, water dripping onto the marble floor. Marla leaned in close, her lips barely inches from my ear. "Useless trash," she whispered, then repeated it louder, for everyone to hear. That broke whatever had been holding me together, but not in the way she expected. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. I didn't crumble. I simply stood there, blinking as the water ran down my temples and pooled at my feet. Inside, something snapped, not loudly, but completely. I wasn't humiliated anymore. I was done. Behind her, Damon had pulled out his phone. He wasn't even hiding it. He filmed me, slow and deliberate, angling for the best view. "This is gold," he muttered. "We're sending this to the group chat." Then, with a smirk, he zoomed in on my face. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. Around me, Marla's relatives had circled like vultures. One of her cousins shook his head and said, "You can tell just by looking. He's not the type of man who can handle a woman like Marla." Another chimed in, "She should have left him a long time ago. You can't fix soft." Their words bounced off me now. I wasn't absorbing any more of their poison. Instead, I was observing. Not them. Myself. I saw the man they were laughing at. A man drenched in filthy water, humiliated in a room full of peers and strangers. But that wasn't the real story anymore. The real story was what I wasn't doing. I wasn't retaliating. I wasn't begging. I wasn't even reacting. I took a breath, then another, and I turned around. Not quickly, not as an escape, just deliberately. Each step toward the exit felt like reclaiming something. My pace steady, my eyes forward. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Let them believe they broke me. Let them laugh and send videos and replay this moment again and again. They had no idea what they had just done. They hadn't destroyed me. They had released me. As I passed the edge of the ballroom, I heard chairs shifting, glasses being filled again, more laughter, trying to reclaim the high of the moment. But something else cut through the chaos. The MC's voice rang out through the overhead speakers, his tone confident and crisp. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pausing to regain attention, "please take your seats." The chatter dulled slightly. He continued, "It is my great honor to welcome the CEO of Bennett and Vale Industries." The room fell still. Forks froze mid-air. I reached the hallway, droplets still sliding from my sleeves, my shirt clinging to my back. But now, every person who had laughed was about to go silent. I turned slowly, retracing my steps toward the ballroom, the wet soles of my shoes leaving faint marks along the polished floor. My clothes clung to me, still damp and stained, but I didn't rush to dry myself or hide it, or let them see it. Let the evidence of their cruelty stay visible. The mess on the outside was nothing compared to the quiet storm forming inside. As I stepped through the double doors again, the mood had shifted. The room wasn't buzzing anymore. People weren't laughing. They stared. Not with mockery this time, but with something that looked a lot like confusion, or maybe it was worry. Either way, it was different. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence said more than anything I could have screamed. A woman near the front set her glass down slowly, whispering, Why is he still here?" Another voice, hushed but sharp. "He's not leaving?" Then came the tremor. "He's connected to the CEO?" Those 6 words rippled through the tables like a pebble in still water. A few eyes darted between me and the stage. A server paused mid-step, tray wobbling. Even the violinists on the side of the room missed a few beats, their rhythm faltering as the energy twisted into something dense and unfamiliar. Near the head table, a silver-haired man in a tailored gray suit, Mr. Halden, one of the senior executives, leaned over and spoke quietly to Marla's uncle. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. "I hope you didn't offend that man," Halden warned. Marla's uncle, already halfway into his second scotch, scoffed. "That guy, he's nobody. He sells printer cartridges or something." Halden didn't smile. He didn't blink. "You're wrong," he said flatly. "And if you knew who he was, you'd be terrified." He turned and walked off, leaving the man stiff and blinking, unsure whether to believe him. I watched it all from the edge of the room. A strange calm had wrapped itself around me like a coat. I didn't feel exposed anymore. I felt ready. Then Marla noticed. She glanced at me, confused. Her smugness was slipping. She stepped toward her family. "What did he say?" she asked, glancing at Halden's back. Her aunt, already tense, answered without looking up. "He told us not to upset your husband." Marla's head jerked in my direction. Her eyes narrowed. "Why would anyone say that about you?" she muttered, half to herself. She still didn't know. She couldn't imagine it. She had spent so many years believing the version of me she created in her mind. That quiet, dull shadow who followed, who blended in, who swallowed his pride because he was weak. She never thought to ask if maybe that silence had a purpose. Before I could take another step, Damon blocked my path. He stood tall, shoulders back, that same arrogant grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He tapped his phone with one hand and crossed his arms. "You don't get to ruin her night," he said, voice low. "Whatever point you're trying to make, just drop it. Walk away now, quietly." I looked him in the eye, still soaked, still dripping onto the marble beneath us. Then I said calmly, "Move." He let out a short laugh. "You think you can talk to me like that? Look at yourself." He jabbed a finger into my chest. It wasn't hard, but enough to smear the dirty water onto his hand. He looked down at it, grimaced, wiped it against his pants. "You're pathetic," he muttered. "She's done with you. Everyone is." I could smell the bourbon on his breath, sharp and sloppy. I stayed still. "You have no idea what tonight is," I told him quietly. He blinked, confused. That was the first crack. Then he leaned closer, trying to fill the space between us with false confidence. But this time, I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I just watched him. And slowly, something behind his expression shifted. He felt it. The difference. Not in my words, but in my presence. He opened his mouth again, but the lights dimmed before he could speak. The MC's voice returned, cutting through the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats." A hush swept across the ballroom like someone had thrown a switch. Damon glanced toward the stage. Clearly irritated, he was losing the spotlight. Behind him, Marla took a few uncertain steps closer, watching, as if trying to understand why I was still standing there, why I hadn't cowered. The crowd stilled. Chairs scooted in. Glasses stopped clinking. The show was about to begin, and they had no idea what was coming. I shifted forward, didn't push, didn't touch him, just stepped toward the aisle. Damon hesitated. His hand twitched at his side. For a second, it looked like he might reach out to stop me, but something in my eyes made him freeze. I passed him. No words, no fight, just finality. For the first time tonight, he didn't look sure of himself. I walked down the aisle, each footstep slow and steady, my clothes still wet, my face expressionless, but everything about me had changed. The MC glanced toward the backstage curtain, waiting for a nod. Instead, I kept walking, not backstage, not away. I headed straight for the stage stairs. People turned, heads craned. Marla's mouth opened slightly, her eyes scanning the room like the answer might be hidden somewhere. But it was too late. I reached the bottom step, paused, placed my foot on it. And at that moment, every person who had mocked me leaned forward, finally realizing something was very wrong. As every person leaned forward, sensing something slipping out of their control, I stepped fully onto the stage. The moment my shoes hit the polished wood, the MC straightened his note cards, cleared his throat, and spoke into the microphone with a steadiness that cut through the ballroom. "Please welcome our CEO, Silas Vale." The room didn't breathe. A glass dropped somewhere to my left. Another clattered on a table. Someone whispered, "No, no, that can't be right." Chairs squeaked as people shifted, trying to make sense of the name they had just heard. I walked toward the podium, the spotlight narrowing around me. Dirty water still seeped from my sleeves, dripping onto the floor with soft taps. The contrast between the stage lights and the filth on my clothes made the truth hit harder than any speech could. I stopped at the microphone and said nothing. The silence stretched, tightening around the room like a rope. People fidgeted. A man tugged at his collar. Someone cleared their throat. Their shame grew with every second I didn't speak. Marla's face was pale. Her eyes darted from me to her family, then back again, as if searching for a version of reality that didn't exist anymore. Her aunt whispered, "Marla." "What have you done?" Marla snapped. "Be quiet. He's doing this to embarrass me." I lifted my gaze and let it sweep across the room. Faces that had mocked me, eyes that had looked past me, mouths that had laughed when the bucket hit. Then I finally spoke. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," I said quietly. "I came here to support my wife. I came here to be part of her night." A murmur rippled through the tables. But then someone called me useless trash. Someone poured dirty water on me. Someone laughed. The words landed with a weight that made even the bravest faces sink. Marla shot up from her chair. "Stop it!" she yelled, voice cracking. "He's lying. He's playing some sick game." I looked at her calmly. "This is your moment, Marla. Say what you need to say. She raised her chin, chest heaving. You're not the CEO. You forged papers. You stole that title. And I can prove it. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Her family stared at her like they'd never met her before. I asked quietly, "Is that your story?" "Yes," she shouted. "Yes, and I have the evidence right here." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen furiously. Look at these transfers. Money missing under your name. It proves you've been..." She stopped mid-sentence, because the room saw exactly what she saw. On her screen, the financial irregularities, the unauthorized transfers, the rerouted funds, all bore one name. Not mine. Damon Wolf. His access code, his timestamps, his trail. A sudden, brutal silence filled the room. Damon stumbled backward. "Marla, what did you do?" She swung toward him, panic rising. "You said you'd cover it. You said your friend in finance deleted everything for us." He stared at her like she had just spoken in a language he didn't understand. "What friend? I never..." "Marla, what are you talking about?" The betrayal sank into her face like a stone pulling her under. I stepped to the side and tapped the tablet on the podium. The projector lit up the wall behind me, displaying the complete internal audit. Every unauthorized access, every routed payment, every falsified entry, all traced to her login patterns and Damon's credentials. Her mother gasped. Her uncle whispered, "We backed the wrong person." Marla's knees buckled. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It can't be real." She scrolled her phone again, frantically, as if the truth would change if she swiped hard enough. But the evidence remained. Security moved forward. Damon panicked. No, this is a setup. She told me. She said..." Marla screamed at him. "You told me it would disappear." The two of them stood there, unraveling in front of hundreds of people, their lies tearing each other apart. Her co-workers looked away, disgusted. Her relatives huddled together, unsure what to say. Even her best friend, who had laughed loudest earlier, moved her chair back like she didn't want to be associated. Marla's mascara streaked down her face as she turned toward me. "Silas, please, stop this." I let the projector fade to black. "This isn't even the beginning," I said quietly. You could feel the temperature in the room drop. Her voice trembled. "What else could you possibly do to us?" I looked down at her, broken, shaking, still clutching the ruined phone she thought would save her. "I haven't addressed the part," I said, "where your entire family becomes involved." Every head snapped toward me. The room was frozen. Then I added the final line. And as Marla fell to her knees, begging for someone, anyone, to save her, I finally told them the part of the truth that would tear her entire family apart. She was still on her knees when I looked up from the podium, her mascara smeared, her chest rising in short, jagged breaths. The entire room seemed to lean forward, not from pity, not even from curiosity, but from a dawning sense that the ugliest part of the truth hadn't been said yet. I stood still in the silence. It stretched out over the ballroom like a heavy tarp, covering every table, every whispered lie, every face that had once turned away from mine. And I let it hang there for a few long seconds until I felt the weight of 15 years press into my spine like an old ache I'd stopped noticing. Then I took a breath, not for effect, for strength. I'm going to tell you something none of you expected to hear tonight. Chairs shifted again. Marla's mother covered her mouth with both hands. One of her cousins stared at me like I was a ghost that had walked out of a courtroom. 15 years ago, I said, voice steady. This company should have gone under. No one moved, and it almost did. Not because of some market crash, not because of poor leadership, but because of one man. I let their fear fill in the name. Then I gave it to them. Charles Brennan. Gasps. Real ones this time. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that escape when reality hits too fast to fake a reaction. Marla's father stood frozen, his eyes locked on mine, already knowing what came next. His wife reached for his arm. Her brother turned toward him, eyes wide. "Dad?" he asked, but Charles said nothing. "He funneled money out of company reserves," I said, "into a real estate deal no one else knew about. Shell accounts. Foreign holding firms. Layers of paperwork so thick it took me 3 years to unwind them." A woman near the back murmured, "Dear God." He thought the project would pay off, that he'd put the money back before anyone noticed, but it failed. And when the audit came, he needed someone to blame. I turned to face the table where the Brennans sat, watching them one by one. Someone quiet, someone naive, someone who wouldn't push back. I tapped the mic once. Me? He chose me. Marla looked up at her father like the world had spun sideways beneath her. I worked in data entry. I trusted him. And when it all came crashing down, I took the fall for missing reports, system glitches, discrepancies I didn't understand at the time. They didn't fire me. They just moved me. My voice didn't crack. It didn't rise. I spent the next decade working through departments, building systems that would catch the kind of theft he committed. I found the paper trail, every hidden document, every diverted cent, and I used the quiet to start buying shares, slowly, privately, while he retired with his name intact. Marla's lips barely moved. "Dad, is that true?" But her father never answered. He just looked at the floor, like he finally saw everything he thought was buried. Standing in the light, that silence was enough. She broke. Tears streamed down her face now, and her sobs weren't angry or loud anymore. They were hollow, like something inside her had finally caved in. All the words she'd thrown at me, useless, invisible, nothing. They bounced back and hit her now, because the man she thought was beneath her had once protected everything she had. "I didn't know," she choked. "Silas, I didn't know." I looked at her without judgment, only truth. "No, you didn't care to." She covered her face. Her whole body trembled. Then I turned back to the crowd. "I'm not here to drag the past into court. The statute of limitations has passed, and I won't jeopardize this company or its employees just to make a point." A few people exhaled, briefly, prematurely. "But I will not protect the Brennan name anymore. Starting tonight, the board will receive the full audit. Names, dates, transfers, access logs. Charles Brennan is permanently removed from all advisory roles. Any future financial influence ends now." The hope in a few faces evaporated. This company will move forward, without secrets, without shadows. Then I looked to Marla. "There will be divorce papers tomorrow." Her eyes widened again. "You didn't break my heart tonight," I said quietly. "You just showed me it had already been broken for a long time." She reached out, hand shaking. I can explain." I stepped back from her. "No, you can only stop pretending." A strangled sob escaped her throat. She reached for no one now, because no one reached back. At her table, arguments had already begun. One cousin shouted, "You said it was all rumors." Another hissed, "You vouched for him, Dad. You vouched for a thief." Marla's mother turned on her husband. You swore it was over. You said it was done. He raised his voice for the first time. I did it to protect us. But there was no us anymore. Just a fractured mess of relatives tearing into each other, dragging old wounds into the open. Security stepped forward to keep it from spilling into chaos. The room was no longer united by their laughter. Now they shared something else. Disgrace. I left the stage quietly. I didn't look back. Not at the people, not at the tables, not at the place where I had once begged to be seen. I walked down the aisle, still damp from the water, still wearing the same suit she thought made me invisible. But now every step felt lighter, not out of triumph, but release. Outside, the Houston night felt sharp against my skin, clean, still. I looked up, breathed in deeply, and let the silence wash over me. And then, from somewhere in memory, I heard my father's voice. Power isn't about controlling others. It's about not letting them control who you become. Tonight, I understood that better than I ever had. I didn't destroy their family. The truth did. All I did was stop carrying it for them. Some endings don't return what was lost, but they give you back who you were meant to be.